Hi there, everybody, and welcome to Progressive Short Takes. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. So lately, there's been a lot of pressure on Nancy Pelosi to accept Trump's $1.8 trillion offer, the latest thing he put forward over the weekend. For example, Ro Khanna has called on Pelosi to accept it because people really need the help, and it does provide substantial help to people. Okay, it provides a plus up, in unemployment insurance payments of $400 a week. It provides another round of stimulus checks. It provides help for the airlines and for restaurant business, and $300 million for state and local governments, as well. It's not as much as what the state and local governments actually need, but it would allow them most probably to postpone layoffs for a few months anyway and give the country a chance to vote. So there are good reasons why people are urging her to commit to such a deal. And on Rising this morning, Crystal and Sagar were both very plainly attacking Nancy Pelosi for being too political about this and for playing politics and for not accepting an offer that was going to help people in the short run to cut down on the misery this winter. On the other hand, what Dave Dayen has to say about this is that, well, I'm just going to go through this with you. He points out, and I think with a lot of justification, that he doesn't think there are any actual talks happening. And he says that real negotiations would involve the faction needed for passage that has consistently been skeptical of moving forward. That is, there is a side, to the negotiation that is not at the table, and that is the Republicans in the Senate. Senator McConnell is not there for these talks. It's just the president, and Nancy Pelosi. The implication here is that Trump can whip the Republicans, and that somehow he has a magic wand to whip them this. But Trump is increasingly unpopular, and I don't think he has the same influence with the Republicans in the Senate that he had in March or April or May. Now, it's a shame he didn't use the influence he had in May to whip the Republicans in line to do something about the HEROES Act. That would have been a big help. But as you know, he himself seemed to be opposed to a deal for a very long time, and is only now so anxious to get one because he realizes that he needs something to stem the tide of what looks like a big defeat against him. But meanwhile, the Senate, without any lobbying from him, or anybody else, they've spent their summer largely on vacation, largely in a bubble of their own creation, only talking to people who disagree with them and their ideology. They're very ideological about it. They don't want to spend a couple $1 trillion more. At least 20 are publicly opposed, says Dave, and the real number is probably much higher. He says, in short, actually, this is a quote from Playbook on Sunday, quote, in short, a significant and important chunk of the Republicans in the Senate hate everything about the package. And at this juncture, it is absolutely no choice of even getting brought up in that chamber. And so Dave is puzzled. He says he's flummoxed, quote unquote, by a boomlet of commentary advising Nancy Pelosi to take the deal offered by the White House, one that now touches $1.8 trillion. But Dave asks, what deal? If Mitch McConnell isn't involved, it does not exist. There's this thought that Donald Trump has a totemic quality where he can whip any Republican into line with a tweet. But that was the Trump who was not down by 12 points and dragging the entire ticket into the muck with him. Republicans are dying to distance themselves from Trump now. And rejecting a big spending bill offers the perfect opportunity. I don't completely agree with Dave on this because it offers the perfect opportunity to be even worse off than Trump is now. If the country as a whole wants a relief bill, which they appear to by very large majorities, and the Republicans who are running for the Senate and for other important offices distance themselves from Trump, not by going bigger on a relief bill, but by saying loudly to everybody, we don't want any relief bill at all. That is both unlikely to save Trump because it's going to reveal that he's powerless now to lead that party. Okay, he doesn't have any influence in them. But it will also show the American people that the Republican Party rank and file in the Senate are completely opposed to what people want. So that kind of distancing from Trump is likely to produce an even bigger defeat for the Republicans that then seems in the card, okay, at this point. Dave Dayen asks, are there 60 votes for a spending bill of this type in the Senate? Perhaps. But there doesn't seem to be any way that Mitch McConnell, more concerned with the Supreme Court and coasting to a re-election, would mess with both by breaking the Hastert rule and pass something of this significance with all Democrats and a handful of the Republicans. The Hastert rule is the idea that you don't vote for any bill unless a majority of your party in the House or Senate wants that bill. And so McConnell is supposedly unlikely to pass a bill with only a few Republicans that mainly relies on the Democrats. And Dave says it's the only thing that can harm his electoral chances, and the timing would be extremely hazardous. Well, I'm not sure I agree with that either. I don't know whether that would harm his electoral chances. Okay, his electoral chances are looking good now because Amy McGrath is such a poor candidate and such a poor campaigner. And thank you, Schumer, for putting such a lousy candidate in there. But, okay, I think the better point is, if people are at all tending towards Amy McGrath, it's only because Trump is so terrible and is being so firm about trying to manage the Senate in the way that is not in the interest of Kentucky voters. So I don't see how coming to the table at the last minute and supporting a big relief bill and then running on that would harm his electoral chances in Kentucky. So I don't know if I agree with Dave on that. It might harm contributions. It might harm his attempts to continue as the majority leader. I don't know, because the donors may not then love him so much. But at the same time, I don't think it's going to hurt his chances with the voters of Kentucky come November 3rd or in the run-up to November 3rd either. Dave continues and says, in fact, there's some thought that said timing and not any real concerns is informing Pelosi's reticence to strike a deal. He says, I will say Pelosi is going out of her way to build substantive opposition, employing all her leading committee chairs to denounce the White House offer as well. Complaints include inadequate spending on testing and bureaucratic red tape on the same, low definitions for community spread, no national tracing plan, vague warnings of slush funds, lack of expansion of the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit, okay, a reduced federal unemployment boost, reduced from 600 to 400, and something regarding clawbacks of other funds from the unemployed, no second draw on PPP, and a dozen other nitpicks. These aren't exactly compelling points of opposition, given that the alternative is nothing, says Dave. But if Pelosi is trying to mess with the Barrett nomination, she would hold out until next Monday. That is this coming Monday. Then she would agree to the top lines. That is the $1.8 trillion and the 400 per week, okay, of unemployment and the $1,200 stimulus bill, and spend a week nailing down the legislative language. So next Monday, you'll note, is October 19th. And then kick a passed bill to the Senate on October 26th, because Dave thinks it will take a week to nail down the language in the bill. At that point, Donald Trump would be screaming for the Senate to act, and they'd have 1 week to pass this major legislation and the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett. And so McConnell, this is Dave's theory, would have to prioritize what to do with major political downsides, okay, in either direction. If he decides not to go for the Barrett nomination but postpone it, okay, until after the election, then there are political downsides because a lot of people who were voting for Republican senators because they were for swinging the Supreme Court over to the right are likely to stay home and to be discouraged. But of course, the other downside is if he goes for Amy Coney Barrett, then of course the downside is that it could be even a bigger sweep for Democrats and for Joe Biden. Dave says, I don't think McConnell can functionally put the bill on the floor. But that is assuming that there's no bill laid that's ready to go on the floor until October 26th. But Dave says, but laying bare GOP priorities would have major political value. In fact, the Democrats don't have to wait to extract but that value right now. And what he means there is that in the negotiation process, there can be media, there can be propaganda that extracts political value between now and the election, okay, in the whole process. Okay, so Dave is saying because the Republicans in the Senate will not come to the table, okay, he thinks Pelosi, she should continue to pay politics until the 26th, and then she would basically give the Republicans a choice of doing one or the other. Now, the problem I see with this is that if they choose Amy Coney Barrett and they don't pass a relief bill, then there won't be a relief bill until January sometime, and people will be condemned to a very, very long winter. On the other hand, there's also the political consideration that should the Republicans go for the relief bill, okay, at the last minute, then Trump is going to claim credit for that, And the Republicans running for the Senate will claim credit for that too. And maybe their losses will be lefts. Maybe the Democrats won't have control of the Senate. And so that's a possible downside of that particular strategy. Okay, they may lose some more contests because they failed to take the Amy Coney Barrett choice. But I think they'll gain much more if they vote for a relief bill for people. On the other hand, there's a downside for the Democrats for that too, and for people. That other downside is, judging from how long the $2 trillion bill succeeded in propping the economy up, the previous CARES Act, the $2.2 trillion bill. What's likely to happen with this bill is that the $1.8 trillion bill won't be propping up people, let's see, it was April, May, June, July, for 4 months, but it will only be propping people up for 3 months. That's November, December, January. In February, people are going to need another relief bill, especially since COVID will not be over. We'll be in the middle of it then, in the middle of the second wave. It won't be over at that time at all, because the Republicans will not go along with the Democrats in shutting the economy down from now till then so COVID can be brought under control. That's not going to happen. It would only happen under a democratically controlled situation where the Senate and the House are both controlled by Democrats and the presidency is also controlled by Democrats. Then the Democrats can mean business when it comes to COVID and try to implement a strategy of the kind that China had and Taiwan had and the really successful countries had. An uncompromising strategy to snuff COVID out as a pandemic in the United States. That's going to take, it's only possible for Democratic Party people to do it. I don't know if they will, but it's certainly not possible for the Republicans to do that. It's obvious. They're a total failure when it comes to doing that. But what happens, what happens if the Republicans stave off a disaster now by passing a relief bill? Then that's good for people November, December, and January for those 3 months. But by the end of January, that's gone. And are the Republicans likely to pass any more relief bills? Are they going to have an aggressive strategy to bring COVID under control? What happens when they refuse to pass another relief bill at the end of January? What happens when they play austerity games at the end of January? Then what do we do? They're still in control of the Senate. Maybe Biden's in control of the presidency. Maybe he's not in control of the presidency. But either way, they're still in control of the Senate. They'll still have control of the Supreme Court. What does that say about the possible future for doing something about the COVID when January comes around? I don't think it presents much hope. So maybe Pelosi is right to hold out. And maybe not. I want to see the $1,200 stimulus bill. I'd want to see a $4,800 stimulus bill. I'm certainly for help for all the suffering people facing a very, very bad winter. I really want to do something for them. But winter, technically, really doesn't start until January. And the most terrible of all winters might actually occur if there are no Democrats controlling the situation in January to put a stop to the sufferings of winter and spring and summer once and for all by not playing austerity games. Now, of course, I can't guarantee Democrats are going to act that way. And I'm not even sure at this point which side I am on. That may depend on what happens to politics over the next week or so. But I think right now there's something to be said for Nancy Pelosi's playing politics, because it's not simply politics. It has to do with who's going to be in control of the government in January. And that can be very important for putting COVID to rest and really having a true and rapid recovery for the economy and a true ending, of the sufferings that we see now. In other words, the problem with this $1.8 trillion bill is that it's another Band-Aid. And that Band-Aid may imperil the possibility of the Republican Party getting completely kicked to the curb. That has to happen right now, I think. That's very, very important. Trump has to be kicked out, and the Republican austerity mongers have to be soundly defeated by the American public. And it has to be seen that the reason for their defeat is because they failed to pass a relief bill for the American people that would end all of these particular sufferings. So I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think there are arguments on both sides. I'm not sure it's such a plain case that Nancy Pelosi ought to accept the $1.8 trillion offer. I personally think what she should have done is come in higher. Instead, she started out with a $3.4 trillion bill. She should have cut it to $2.8 trillion and bargained very vigorously from that point to try to get the administration to come up to $2.4 trillion or something like that. Why? Because at this point, it was important to get yet another round of stimulus. Not just a $1,200 stimulus, but $1,200 right now and $1,200, in another month. She needed to really hold up Trump at this point. As usual, she compromised far too much by going down from $3.4 trillion to $2.2 trillion. Yes, I know the Republicans are reluctant to pass anything, even after she came down to $2.2 trillion. But there I submit, if Trump can whipsaw them to accept the $1.8 trillion compromise, he could have whipsawed them to accept a $2.6 trillion compromise too. It's not that much against their so-called principles. If he had said, look, I'm going to tweak the hell out of all of you if you don't vote for this bill because I need this bill to stay in the presidency, I think enough of them would have gone along to pass that $2.6 trillion bill. or $2.4 trillion bill. So I think Pelosi has still left 600 to $800 billion on the table in her negotiations with the Republicans. I think she is a terrible negotiator and an incompetent who should be replaced as Speaker as soon as the new session of Congress actually starts. I agree this is a hard one because people do need money and they need money right now. I completely agree with Dave Dayen on it, but it's just a hard one. So that's it for this Progressive Short Take. I'll see you soon.